A 17-year-old girl wakes up pregnant, with no memory of how it happened. The school is silent. Her classmates are scared. But when a new teacher arrives, he knows more than he should. So, who did this to her? And why is everyone covering it up? St. Luke's Girls' College wasn't the type of place where things went wrong, at least not publicly. The school was tucked behind tall gates in Umuahia, with its cracked white walls and strict uniforms. They prided themselves on discipline, godliness, and silence. But on the night Grace Adams vanished, that silence became something darker. Grace was 17, quiet, focused, and almost invisible. A scholarship student from a struggling home in Onitsha, raised by her widowed mother, who sold fabrics in the market. Grace didn't wear flashy hair or chase boys. She was the kind of girl who washed her socks by hand and read her Bible at night. A girl no one expected trouble from. That evening, the sky growled with thunder. In the study hall, students scribbled notes while rain tapped lightly on the windows. Grace leaned toward her roommate, Ella, and whispered, "I feel dizzy. I'll lie down." Ella nodded. "Okay. Want me to come?" "No, I'll be fine," Grace said. But she never made it back to the dorm. By lights out, Ella grew anxious. Grace's bed remained untouched. Her sandals were by the door. No one had seen her. Ella told the house mistress, who brushed it off as an overnight stomach bug. But when the sun rose and Grace was still missing, panic bloomed. A full search didn't begin until late morning. Around noon, a groundskeeper found her unconscious behind the chapel, hidden beneath dry leaves. Her skirt was torn, her pulse weak, her body cold. The school nurse screamed when she saw her. They rushed Grace to the clinic, but no police were called, no questions asked. Just hushed voices in the staff room and forced prayers at assembly. Ella wanted answers. She asked if maybe someone had taken Grace. A teacher pulled her aside and warned, "If you want to graduate, learn to keep your mouth shut." That night, the girls lay in their bunks, whispering behind covered mouths. Something had happened to Grace Adams, and whoever did it wasn't afraid. Because the school wasn't trying to find them, it was trying to forget. Grace opened her eyes to a white ceiling and the faint sound of a humming fan. Her body felt distant, like she was floating inside it. She blinked slowly, taking in the unfamiliar room. It smelled of Dettol and something else. Old curtains, fear maybe. Her lips were dry. Her chest ached with confusion. A woman leaned over her, clutching her hand. "Grace? Grace, can you hear me?" It was Sister Ruth, the school nurse. Her voice cracked with relief. "Thank God. You're awake. You're going to be okay." Grace's voice came out a whisper. "Where am I?" "You're at the school clinic. You collapsed, Grace. It's been 3 weeks." 3 weeks? Grace struggled to sit up, but her arms gave out. 1,000 questions rushed into her mind, but nothing made sense. She remembered study hour. She remembered saying goodnight to Ella, then nothing. Sister Ruth glanced around, lowered her voice, and added gently, "Grace, you're pregnant." The room tilted. Grace froze, certain she had misheard. "What?" "You're pregnant. The tests confirmed it." Grace's eyes filled with silent tears. Her throat tightened, but no sound came out. How could this be true? She had never been with anyone. She had never even kissed a boy. By evening, her mother arrived. Mama looked older. Her face carved with lines worry had dug deep. She wept openly, hugging her daughter like she was afraid to let go. Grace clung to her, more lost than she'd ever felt. The next morning, the school principal arrived with her usual forced smile. "We're just glad you're awake. The past few weeks have been delicate. Let's focus on your healing now. You'll go home to rest." No mention of an investigation. No curiosity about how a girl under their care ended up pregnant and unconscious behind a chapel. That's when Grace began to understand. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It wasn't an accident. It was something the school wanted erased. And the longer she stayed silent, the easier that would be for them. But deep in her chest, something had shifted. Grace wasn't going to stay silent. Not anymore. Returning home wasn't the comfort Grace hoped it would be. The streets of Onitsha buzzed with life, hawkers shouting, buses honking, the usual chaos. But for Grace, it all felt distant. Her mother kept her close, barely letting her out of sight, afraid that if she blinked, Grace might vanish again. Neighbors whispered. Some asked questions with forced smiles. Others stared. The news had spread fast. The scholarship girl from St. Luke's came back pregnant. No one knew how. Everyone claimed they didn't know the full story, but they speculated all the same. At home, Mama tried to be strong. She cooked Grace's favorite meals, massaged her feet at night, and prayed loudly in their tiny living room. But sometimes Grace would catch her crying behind the curtain, gripping her Bible as if it might rewrite what had happened. Grace barely spoke, not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't know what to say. How could she explain a memory that didn't exist? How could she describe the feeling of waking up inside a nightmare with no beginning? Her body began to change. Her uniform no longer fit. She moved slower. The doctor visits became routine. Yet no matter how the world tried to wrap her in normal, her heart stayed numb. Then one day, Ella showed up at her door. I told them I was going to see my aunt, she whispered, holding a small nylon bag. She hugged Grace tightly. I needed to see you. I needed to know if you're okay. Grace broke down in her arms. For the first time since waking up, she cried loudly, shaking, raw, uncontrollable tears. Ella wiped her face. Grace, before that night, I remember seeing someone near the chapel, a man. I didn't get a good look, but I thought it was Mr. Obasi. Grace blinked. Mr. Obasi? The senior science teacher? He had barely spoken to her beyond class. Or so she thought. It wasn't proof, but it was the first crack in the silence. The first thread to pull. And for the first time, Grace felt something rise inside her that she hadn't felt since that awful day. Anger. Grace couldn't sleep that night. Mr. Obasi. The name echoed in her mind like a haunting whisper. He was respected, quiet, a man in his early 40s who taught chemistry with little warmth and even fewer words. He never paid attention to girls like her, at least not in public. But now that Ella mentioned it, Grace began to remember moments she had once brushed off. How he always lingered in the corridor when her class ended. How his hand once brushed her shoulder longer than it should have. How he once asked her to stay behind for extra notes, though she never understood why. He didn't even give her any. It all felt so subtle at the time. Harmless. But now, in hindsight, it felt like something had been building, quietly. The next morning, Grace sat with her mother and told her everything Ella said. Mama's eyes darkened, her hands trembling slightly as she held her daughter's. We have to do something, Grace. You can't carry this burden alone. They visited the school, but Mrs. Okoro, the principal, met them with cold politeness. We appreciate your concern, but Mr. Obasi has served this school for over 15 years. He's a trusted teacher. Allegations without evidence are dangerous, Grace. Think about your future. Her words stung. Her tone was final. They were dismissed. Outside school gate, Grace sat under a mango tree, her head bowed. Mama paced furiously beside her, muttering prayers. That's when a voice interrupted. Grace? She looked up. It was a new face. Mr. Daniel, a young teacher just hired. He was maybe in his late 20s, with kind eyes and a gentle voice. He glanced around before leaning in. I wasn't here when it happened, but I've heard whispers. Be careful. Not everyone here wants the truth found. His words unsettled her. How did he know? What did he mean? Grace watched him walk away, questions bubbling beneath her skin. For the first time, she realized this wasn't just about what had happened to her. This was about the system that allowed it, and the silence that protected it. Mr. Daniel's warning echoed in Grace's ears for days. She hadn't known him before. He'd been hired while she was recovering, but there was something unsettling in his tone, not just concern, but fear. And it made her wonder, What exactly had he heard? Back home, Grace began writing everything she remembered. Dates, faces, feelings, even the dreams she had while unconscious. They were scattered fragments, but she hoped they would someday make sense. Her mother encouraged it. "Write it all down," she said. "Your voice is power, even when people refuse to listen." A week later, Grace was invited to speak at a small community youth forum organized by a local NGO. They had heard about her story from a nurse who worked at the clinic. It wasn't a courtroom. It wasn't justice. But it was a room full of listening ears. With trembling hands, Grace stood and told her truth. Not the polished, digestible version the school wanted, but the raw truth. The fainting, the memory loss, the pregnancy, the silence. She didn't name anyone, not yet. But the room fell into stunned silence. Afterward, a young woman approached her. "I went to St. Luke's too. 10 years ago," she whispered. "There was another girl. Something similar happened to her. She left school quietly, and no one spoke of it again." Grace's heart clenched. How many girls? How many secrets buried behind stained chapel walls? She returned home that night with a fire in her chest. "I want to go back to school," she told her mother. Mama stared at her. "Are you sure?" "I need to finish what I started, and I need to show them that they didn't break me." The next day, she walked through the school gates with her chin slightly higher. Students stared. Teachers whispered. But Grace moved like someone with purpose. Mr. Daniel watched her from a distance. Their eyes met. He gave a small nod, like he understood what this moment meant. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about truth, and Grace was ready to dig it out, even if it meant bleeding in the process. Back in the four walls of St. Luke's, Grace felt the weight of eyes on her everywhere she went. Some students looked at her with pity, others with suspicion. A few whispered cruel words behind her back, as if her pain were gossip. Still, she walked with quiet strength. She went to class, she took notes, she prayed at chapel, though now the altar felt colder, the hymns emptier. One afternoon, as she packed her books at the end of biology class, a folded piece of paper slipped from her desk. It wasn't hers. Someone had placed it there. She opened it slowly, her hands shaking. "Meet me behind the science block after prep. I need to talk to you, please. D." She knew it had to be Mr. Daniel. Her heart pounded as she made her way there that evening. The campus was quiet, the sky dim with approaching dusk. When she rounded the corner, he was waiting. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, his eyes scanning the surroundings. "I didn't mean to frighten you." Grace crossed her arms. "Then why the note?" "Because I couldn't say this in public," he whispered. "I know what happened to you, and I think I know who did it." Her breath caught. He looked around again. "It wasn't just you, Grace. There have been other cases. Mr. Obasi has been protected by the school for years. He's careful, and the girls he hurt were either too afraid or too poor to fight back." Grace felt a mix of rage and relief wash over her. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't alone. "I want to help you," Daniel continued, "but you need more than words. You need evidence." He handed her a brown envelope. Inside were photocopies, student reports, quiet complaints that were never filed officially. Grace flipped through them with trembling fingers. Different names, same pattern. A cold truth formed in her stomach. This wasn't just her battle. This was a wound that ran deep. Grace looked up at Daniel. "Why are you helping me?" He hesitated, then answered quietly, "Because I should have spoken up long ago, and staying silent is no longer an option." Grace stared at the documents in her lap long after Mr. Daniel left. Each page felt like a scream that had been buried for years. Names, dates, incidents swept under the rug by the same school that claimed to protect its girls. She couldn't sleep that night. The next morning, she visited her mother's pastor, one who also worked with a legal aid foundation. With his help, they drafted a formal report and submitted it to the Ministry of Education. Grace included the evidence Mr. Daniel had given her, and then, for the first time, she named him, Mr. Obasi. The school tried to keep things quiet, but the news spread like wildfire. Local newspapers picked it up. Social media latched onto it. Scholarship girl exposes abuse at elite boarding school. Girls from different years came forward. Some still students. Others now women with families of their own. Their stories matched Grace's in chilling detail. The education board sent investigators. Mr. Obasi was suspended. The staff who had covered up previous complaints were questioned. Mrs. Okoro, the principal, who had once dismissed Grace with a smile, was asked to step down. But the most powerful moment came weeks later, in court. Grace stood in the witness box, belly already round with the child growing inside her. She spoke clearly, her voice steady even as her heart raced. Mr. Obasi sat across from her, no longer a man protected by walls and reputation. Just another accused predator facing the truth. The court ruled in Grace's favor. Obasi was sentenced. And though it didn't erase the pain, it brought justice. Something so many before her never received. When she walked out of the courthouse, cameras flashed. Microphones were pushed toward her. But Grace didn't stop to speak. She walked straight into her mother's arms, and this time, her tears weren't from fear or shame. They were from victory. That night, she sat by her window, notebook in hand, writing the first lines of her story. Not as a victim, but as a survivor. And a voice that would never be silenced again. The end. If this story gripped your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more interesting African stories that matter. What would you do if this happened to your daughter or sister? Do you believe schools truly protect their students? Or just their reputation? Please let's talk in the comments, and thanks for watching.